Imagine for a moment a world where brilliance often went unseen. Throughout history, there were men and women who carried ideas far ahead of their time. They solved problems others did not yet understand. They drew designs for machines no one could build. They wrote words that no one was ready to read. Their work shaped the world quietly, sometimes centuries after their own lives had ended. Yet most of their names remain in the shadows, forgotten by the very world they helped to change. My name is Nathan, and I will be reading this story for you tonight. Together we will walk slowly through those shadows. Calmly, gently, we will bring back the stories of these hidden minds. Some were silenced, some ignored, some remembered only in fragments, but each left behind a thread in the vast fabric of history. If these quiet journeys through history help you to rest, or if they bring comfort while the night feels long, I kindly invite you to support the channel by subscribing. Your presence allows us to continue creating calm history for sleep, focus, and peace of mind. In the bustling city of Alexandria, centuries before the modern age, there lived a man whose ideas seemed to belong to another world. His name was Heron. The time was the 1st century of our era, a moment when the city stood as one of the greatest centers of learning the ancient world had ever known. Libraries overflowed with scrolls. Scholars debated in shaded courtyards. Merchants filled the streets with the sound of their trade. In the midst of this energy, Heron worked quietly, studying, building, and imagining devices that no one else could even picture. Heron is remembered today as a mathematician and engineer, but these titles feel too small for his restless imagination. He was a designer of wonders. Among his most remarkable creations was a small machine powered not by muscle, wind, or water, but by steam. It was called the eolipile. Imagine a sphere mounted on a pair of hollow tubes, heated from below by fire. As the water inside boiled, steam rushed out of the tubes, spinning the sphere with surprising force. It was, in essence, the first steam engine. The eolipile did not drive carts, ships, or tools. It remained a curiosity, a demonstration of natural forces. But in that simple spinning globe lay the seed of a revolution that would not come until 17 centuries later, when steam engines would power the Industrial Revolution. Heron had already glimpsed the future, yet his world was not ready to follow. Heron also created machines that astonished audiences in more playful ways. He designed automatic doors that opened when a fire was lit on a nearby altar using air pressure and pulleys. He built fountains that seemed to flow forever without any visible source of power. He even constructed mechanical theaters where figures moved on their own, enacting short plays powered by carefully hidden weights and ropes. To the eyes of the people of Alexandria, these were marvels, bordering on magic. Yet, to Heron, they were demonstrations of principle, proof that the laws of nature could be directed with careful thought. There was a temple in Alexandria where one of his devices impressed the faithful. When worshippers placed a coin in a slot, a small mechanism released a measured amount of water for ritual cleansing. It was, in effect, one of the earliest vending machines. Though simple in appearance, the design showed a mind always looking for practical ways to combine mechanics with daily life. Why then is Heron not remembered as the father of the industrial age? Why is his name not as famous as those who later built engines and machines that reshaped the world? The answer lies not in his genius, but in his context. The society of his time did not need steam power to run factories or railroads. Labor was provided by slaves, and industry was limited to crafts and trade. To his contemporaries, Heron's inventions were clever amusements, impressive for temples and theaters, but not the foundation of a new era. Even so, his writings endured. Copies of his treatises on mechanics, pneumatics, and mathematics circulated across the centuries. When scholars of later ages discovered them, they were astonished to find such advanced ideas resting in the past. The aeolipile, the automatic doors, the mechanical theatre, each spoke of a mind centuries ahead of its time. Heron's story is a reminder that genius often waits for the world to catch up. Ideas do not always flourish in the moment they are born. Sometimes they rest, quietly hidden in scrolls or whispered in classrooms until an age arrives that can understand their value. As we drift through the memory of this Alexandrian engineer, we see more than devices and diagrams. We see a glimpse of human imagination reaching beyond its present, daring to play with forces that seemed untouchable. Heron may have lived in a world that saw his work as novelty, but history now allows us to see him as a pioneer, a forgotten genius whose playful machines carried the first breath of a future that was still many centuries away. In the 12th century, far from Alexandria and the ancient world of Heron, another remarkable figure emerged. His name was Al-Jazari, an engineer, inventor, and artist from the lands of Mesopotamia. He lived during the golden age of Islamic science, when knowledge flowed between cultures, libraries thrived, and scholars pushed the limits of mathematics and engineering. Yet even in this fertile ground, the creations of Al-Jazari stood apart. They seemed to belong to an age of machines that would not fully arrive for centuries. Al-Jazari was employed by the Artukid dynasty in what is now Turkey. His task was not only to serve as a craftsman, but also to create devices that displayed the wealth, power, and sophistication of the court. In this role, he wrote his famous book, The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, a collection of detailed descriptions and illustrations of more than 100 machines. This work is sometimes called the most important mechanical treatise of the medieval world. Among his most celebrated inventions was a mechanical water clock, designed not just to tell time, but to amaze those who looked upon it. One of these clocks featured a boat floating in a basin carrying figures that moved and struck cymbals as the hours passed. The design combined utility with spectacle, showing how science and art could merge into a single creation. Another of his devices was a water-raising machine powered by a system of gears and cranks. These mechanisms were so advanced that some historians see them as the first clear examples of modern engineering principles. His use of crankshafts, for example, would later become central to engines that powered the industrial age. Yet here, centuries earlier, Al-Jazari was already shaping these ideas with careful hands. Perhaps the most enchanting of his inventions were the automata mechanical figures that seemed alive. He built a mechanical peacock that could present soap and water for hand washing. He designed musical automata, such as a group of drummers powered by water, who struck rhythms as if they were living musicians. These machines entertained guests at court, but also served to demonstrate the mastery of human ingenuity over nature. Reading about these creations, one cannot help but feel a sense of wonder. They blur the line between practical engineering and imaginative art. They show a mind that understood gears, weights, and hydraulics, yet also cared about delight, beauty, and performance. Still, much like Heron before him, Al-Jazari was not fully appreciated as a founder of a new age. His inventions were admired, but they remained confined to courts and palaces, designed to dazzle rather than to transform society. The world around him lacked the economic and social pressures that would later turn such mechanisms into engines of industry. His genius existed in an age that valued display over mass application. Even so, his book survived, copied, and studied by later generations. In those pages, the seeds of modern mechanics rested quietly. When historians of engineering looked back, they recognized the significance of his cranks, cams, and gear systems. Without Al-Jazari, the history of machinery might have followed a different course. His story is one of brilliance, shining in a particular moment, not fully grasped by his contemporaries, but speaking across time to those who would one day understand. In his automata and clocks, we glimpse not only skill but also imagination, the dream of making lifeless matter move, respond, and even entertain. It is a dream that continues in robotics and engineering today. As we reflect on Al-Jazari, we see another forgotten genius whose quiet inventions carried within them the heartbeat of a mechanical future. His world may not have been ready to industrialize, but his mind showed what was possible centuries before it became reality. One of Papin's earliest and most lasting creations was not an engine, but something found in kitchens today. He designed a pressure cooker known as Papin's digester. It used steam pressure to cook food more quickly. A simple but profound idea. The same principle that softened bones and tough meat also revealed the power of controlled steam. In this everyday device lay the seed of greater possibilities. Papin's interest in steam did not stop there. He imagined machines that could use pressure to move pistons, creating force without muscle or animal power. His designs for steam engines were rough and incomplete, but they pointed directly toward what others would later perfect. He even suggested the use of steam power for ships, building early prototypes that attempted to harness this invisible force to drive paddles across the water. In one experiment, Papin placed a cylinder filled with water over a fire, sealed with a piston. As the water boiled and turned to steam, the piston rose. When cooled, the steam condensed, and the piston fell again. This cycle was the basis of later steam engines. It was simple, powerful, and ahead of its time. But Papin lacked the resources and support to develop it into a practical machine. Society often rewards those who arrive at the right moment, not those who arrive too early. Papin was one of the latter. His ideas were brilliant, but the world around him was not yet ready to apply them on a large scale. He lived through periods of war and instability, and he struggled to gain the patronage needed to push his work forward, while others later became celebrated for turning steam into industry. Papin's contributions faded quietly into the background. His final years were marked by poverty and disappointment. Records suggest that he died in obscurity in London, with little recognition for his efforts. Yet his papers remained, and later, engineers would see in them the outlines of their own work. The piston, the cylinder, the very idea of turning steam into usable motion, all were present in Papin's imagination. Looking back, one cannot help but sense a certain melancholy in his story. He stood so close to a breakthrough that would change the world, yet he did not live to see it realized. And yet, even in his obscurity, his vision mattered. Without the groundwork laid by Papin, the great engines of James Watt and others might have taken longer to appear. His forgotten experiments were part of the chain that carried humanity into the industrial age. Denis Papin reminds us that genius does not always bring reward. Sometimes it brings only the quiet satisfaction of glimpsing a future that others will later claim. He was a man who cooked with steam, dreamed with steam, and built with steam, long before the world knew what such power could do. Though he died forgotten, his ideas lived on, shaping the engines that would drive trains, ships, and factories. His name may be faint, but his influence remains strong in the hidden roots of modern history. By the 19th century, the dream of harnessing power without muscle or animal strength was becoming reality. Steam engines had already begun to reshape mines, mills, and transport. Yet another step was needed, one that would bring energy into a smaller, more efficient form. This step came through the work of Nikolaus Otto, a German inventor whose name is now faint in memory, though his creation became the heart of the modern age. Otto was born in 1832 in the Rhineland. His early life gave no sign of the role he would play in history. He trained as a salesman and worked in commerce, not science. Yet he carried a fascination for the engines that were beginning to appear around him. He saw the promise of power that could be made compact and practical. Unlike great machines of steam, he imagined something that could fit in a workshop, a carriage, or eventually an automobile. In 1861, Otto began experimenting with gas engines. His first attempts were crude and unreliable, but they carried within them the outline of a revolution. Through persistence, he developed what became known as the four-stroke cycle: intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust. This simple rhythm of a piston moving up and down in a cylinder is the very principle that still drives cars today. It is called the Otto cycle in his honor. The breakthrough came with his prototype in 1876, a gas-powered internal combustion engine. Compared to steam engines, it was smaller, lighter, and more efficient. It did not need huge boilers or heavy structures. It could be adapted to many uses, from industry to transport. In that moment, Otto brought power from the domain of factories into the hands of ordinary machines. Like many pioneers, Otto did not work alone. He partnered with engineers such as Eugen Langen, and together they refined and demonstrated their engines. Exhibitions across Europe drew attention to these curious machines that ran on coal gas and produced smooth, reliable motion. Investors began to see the future. The path toward automobiles, tractors, and countless other devices was now open. And yet, despite this achievement, Otto never became a household name. The world remembers later figures such as Carl Benz, who applied engines to practical automobiles. Otto remained the quiet engineer behind the principle itself. His invention spread, but his personal fame did not. He lived and worked modestly, dying in 1891. His contribution acknowledged mainly in technical circles. The story of Nikolaus Otto is a reminder that history often overlooks those who build the foundation. Without the four-stroke engine, the entire 20th century would look different. Cars, airplanes, and countless machines relied on his principle. It powered not only industry, but the very movement of people across continents. His cycle became invisible only because it was everywhere, too common to notice. In reflecting on Otto's life, one feels both gratitude and quiet sadness. Gratitude, because his persistence gave us a tool that reshaped the world. Sadness, because his name has faded, overshadowed by those who stood on his work and carried it into the spotlight. He is a forgotten genius, not because his invention was small, but because it was so large that it became part of the background of modern life. As we close this first segment, we see a pattern already forming. From Heron of Alexandria with his spinning sphere, to Al-Jazari with his mechanical wonders, to Denis Papin with his experiments in steam, and finally to Otto with his internal combustion engine. The story is the same. These were minds ahead of their time. They reached forward into the future, offering visions and machines that others would only later bring to full use. Their genius was not always recognized, but their legacy continues quietly in every engine that turns, every wheel that moves, and every machine that carries the pulse of modern life. In the ancient city of Alexandria, where the sea met the desert and knowledge gathered like a tide, there lived a woman whose brilliance shone far beyond her age. Her name was Hypatia. She was born in the 4th century, a time when the Roman Empire was divided and the old world of pagan learning was colliding with the rising influence of Christianity. In this turbulent setting, Hypatia became a teacher, a philosopher, and a mathematician. She was not only unusual for her gender, but extraordinary in her wisdom. Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a respected scholar and mathematician. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by books, numbers, and the language of reason. Her father guided her, but soon she surpassed even his knowledge. Hypatia studied geometry, astronomy, and philosophy. She developed a calm method of teaching that attracted students from many lands. In the classrooms of Alexandria, she spoke of Plato and Aristotle, of Euclid and Ptolemy, drawing together the wisdom of centuries. What made Hypatia remarkable was not only her intellect, but her presence. Ancient writers described her as composed, graceful, and commanding. She lectured publicly, something almost unheard of for a woman of her time. Her students included future bishops, leaders, and officials, men who would carry her influence far beyond the walls of the city. To them, she was not only a teacher of numbers and stars, but a guide to life itself. Hypatia also worked as an inventor. She is said to have built devices to measure the movement of the heavens, such as astrolabes and hydrometers. These tools allowed scholars to track the positions of the stars and understand the behavior of liquids. She brought together theory and practice, showing that philosophy could be grounded in useful instruments. Yet her brilliance placed her in a dangerous position. The city of Alexandria was not only a center of learning, but also of conflict. Religious tensions ran high. The Christian church was growing in authority, while the old traditions of Greek philosophy struggled to survive. Hypatia, as a public teacher associated with classical knowledge, became a symbol. To some, she represented wisdom. To others, she represented resistance to the new order. Her tragic end came in the year 415. In the midst of political struggles between the governor Orestes and the bishop Cyril, Hypatia was accused of influencing the governor against the church. A mob of zealots attacked her in the streets. She was dragged from her chariot and brutally killed. The act shocked the ancient world. A woman of learning had been silenced, not by debate, but by violence. The death of Hypatia marked more than the loss of one mind. It symbolized a turning point, the decline of the classical tradition in Alexandria. The great library had already suffered, and now one of its brightest living lights was extinguished. For centuries after, she was remembered in whispers, her story retold as a warning of how fragile knowledge can be in the face of fear and anger. Today, Hypatia stands as both inspiration and caution. She shows us the strength of intellect, courage, and independence. She also shows how societies can turn against their own brightest voices when change creates fear. Her legacy endures not in volumes of her own writing, for almost none survived, but in the memory of her teaching, in the respect of her students, and in the symbol she became for reason and free thought. As we reflect on her life, the image that lingers is of a woman standing calmly before her students, speaking of the stars, the numbers, and the harmony of the universe. While the city outside trembled with conflict, Hypatia of Alexandria was a philosopher of clarity in a time of chaos, and though she was silenced, her name still carries the quiet strength of a forgotten genius. In the late 16th century, when Europe was alive with both discovery and fear, there lived a man whose thoughts reached further than most dared to imagine. His name was Giordano Bruno. He was born in the Italian town of Nola in the year 1548. From his earliest days, he showed a restless curiosity. He joined a monastery as a young man, studying philosophy and theology, but his mind would not stay within the walls of tradition. Bruno lived in a time when the heavens themselves were being reimagined. The Polish astronomer Copernicus had placed the sun at the center of the universe and the earth in motion around it. This was already a bold idea, but Bruno went further. He looked at the stars above and saw not distant lights fixed to a crystal sphere, but other suns, each perhaps with their own planets. He spoke of an infinite universe filled with countless worlds. For him, creation had no edge. It stretched beyond comprehension, alive with endless possibility. To us today, this vision seems familiar, even natural. Yet in Bruno's world, it was dangerous. The church held firm to a cosmos carefully ordered and finite, with humanity at its center. Bruno's infinite universe suggested a creation larger than any doctrine, a creation in which humanity might not be unique. This was not only a scientific idea, but a spiritual challenge. Bruno was not a quiet man. He traveled across Europe, teaching, debating, and publishing. In Geneva, Paris, and London, he argued with scholars, often making enemies with his sharp tongue and unwillingness to compromise. His books combined philosophy, astronomy, and poetry, weaving together the infinite universe with ideas about the soul and divinity. He imagined that every part of nature carried spirit, that the cosmos itself was alive with divine presence. The boldness of his vision brought both admiration and suspicion. Some saw him as a genius, a thinker expanding the horizon of human thought. Others saw him as a dangerous heretic. Eventually, the weight of opposition caught up with him. In 1592, he was arrested by the Inquisition in Venice. He was transferred to Rome, where he faced years of interrogation. For 7 long years, Bruno stood before his judges, refusing to deny his ideas. He would not renounce his vision of the infinite universe, nor his belief in countless worlds. In the end, the verdict was death. In the year 1600, he was led to the Campo de' Fiori in Rome, stripped of his robes and burned at the stake. Witnesses said he faced his fate with calm defiance, refusing even at the last moment to beg for mercy. The execution of Giordano Bruno was a symbol of the conflict between free thought and rigid authority. To the authorities, he was a dangerous voice that threatened the order of faith. To later generations, he became a martyr of science and philosophy, a reminder that ideas cannot be silenced by fire. Bruno left behind no telescopes, no precise measurements, no mechanical devices. His genius was not in instruments, but in vision. He dared to imagine what others could not. He broke open the walls of the universe, turning the sky from a closed dome into an endless expanse. Though centuries passed before astronomy confirmed such vastness, Bruno's imagination prepared the way. As we recall his life, we see a man who lived with courage, though it led him to tragedy. He reminds us that truth is not always safe, and that those who question too boldly may face harsh consequences. Yet his vision remains with us, not as flames in a square, but as the quiet awareness that every star in the sky might be another sun, shining over unknown worlds. Giordano Bruno stands as a forgotten genius, not because his name is lost, but because the depth of his vision is often overlooked. He dreamed of infinity when the world clung to walls. In his silence and his fire, he left us the gift of an open universe. In the vast lands of Persia during the 10th and 11th centuries, there lived a man whose mind seemed to embrace every field of knowledge. His name was Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Sina, known in the Western world as Avicenna. He was born in the year 980 in the region of Bukhara, a place where cultures met and learning thrived. From an early age, he showed an extraordinary memory and a thirst for knowledge that seemed limitless. By the time he was a teenager, Avicenna had mastered the works of Aristotle and other classical philosophers. He studied mathematics, astronomy, and medicine with equal passion. When he was only 18 years old, he was already serving as a physician to nobles. His skill became so great that he was called to heal the ruler of Bukhara himself. The treatment was successful, and in gratitude, Avicenna was granted access to the royal library. This treasure of books became the foundation of his vast learning. Avicenna's greatest contribution was in the field of medicine. His monumental work, known as the Canon of Medicine, gathered the knowledge of Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian sources, combined with his own observations. Written in clear language, it became the standard medical text in both the Islamic world and later in Europe. For centuries, students studied its pages to learn about anatomy, diagnosis, and treatment. Even into the 17th century, the canon was used as a foundation for medical practice. Yet Avicenna was not only a physician, he was also a philosopher who sought to unite reason and faith. He wrote about the nature of the soul, the structure of the universe, and the principles of logic. His ideas influenced scholars for generations, including great medieval thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas. In mathematics, he explored geometry and algebra. In astronomy, he studied the movement of the stars. In every subject he touched, his mind left a mark. Despite his brilliance, Avicenna's life was not one of comfort. He lived through political turmoil, serving as a court physician to various rulers. At times he was honored, at times imprisoned, his wandering life did not prevent him from writing. More than 200 works are attributed to him, covering philosophy, medicine, science, and poetry. Many of these writings survived, spreading across cultures and centuries. Why then is Avicenna not a household name today, like Hippocrates or Galileo? One reason is that his fame was overshadowed by the divisions of history. As Europe rose in the Renaissance, much of the credit for scientific progress was given to Western thinkers, while scholars of the Islamic world were forgotten. Another reason is that Avicenna's works were written in Arabic and Persian, languages less familiar to later generations in the West. His voice was strong, but it was carried along paths that many modern readers never walked, and yet his influence remains. When we speak of medicine as a science based on observation and reason, we echo Avicenna. When we combine philosophy with science, we follow in his path. His canon was not only a book of cures, but a vision of knowledge as a whole system where the body, the mind, and the universe were linked. As we think of Avicenna, we picture a scholar seated by a lamp, scrolls and books piled around him, writing through the night. Outside, the world shifted with war and politics. But within those pages, his ideas endured. He was a man of thought, but also of practice, healing the sick, guiding the rulers, and leaving behind a legacy too vast to measure. Avicenna reminds us that genius often transcends borders and centuries. His name may not be spoken often, but the patterns of his thought run quietly through the history of science and medicine. In his life, we see the union of reason and care, of philosophy and healing. And in that union, he remains a forgotten genius who truly helped to change the world. In 17th century Mexico, at the far reaches of the Spanish Empire, there lived a woman whose hunger for knowledge defied every expectation of her time. Her name was Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. She was born in the year 1648 near Mexico City, in a world where education was tightly controlled by the church and where women were rarely allowed to study. Yet from her earliest days, Sor Juana displayed a mind that could not be confined. As a child, she learned to read by secretly following her older sister to school. By the age of 8, she was writing poetry. At 12, she asked to disguise herself as a boy in order to attend university, but her request was denied. Still, her thirst for learning only grew stronger. She taught herself Latin, studied philosophy and theology, and read every book she could find. It was said that when she entered a library, she consumed knowledge with a speed and depth that astonished even the most learned men. When she entered a convent, Sor Juana found a space where she could continue her studies. The convent gave her relative freedom and access to books. Her cell became both a refuge and a library. She filled it with volumes on science, history, music, and literature. From this quiet room, she wrote poetry and plays that blended wit, scholarship, and spiritual reflection. Her works gained admiration across Mexico and Spain, and she became known as the 10th muse of the New World. Sor Juana's writings revealed not only her brilliance, but also her courage. She argued for the education of women at a time when such an idea was considered dangerous. In one famous letter, she defended a woman's right to study, asking why the pursuit of truth should be denied to half of humanity. She pointed out that ignorance did not serve faith, and that learning could deepen devotion. These arguments placed her at odds with church authorities who believed that her studies distracted from religious duty. As her fame grew, so too did the opposition. Powerful churchmen began to criticize her, accusing her of pride and of straying beyond the proper role of a nun. Under pressure, she was eventually forced to give up her library and her writing. She signed a confession of humility, declaring herself the worst of all women. Yet behind those words was the weight of coercion, not the truth of her spirit. Her final years were quiet. She cared for her fellow nuns during an epidemic, and in 1695 she herself fell ill and died. She was only 46 years old. With her death, much of her work faded into obscurity, hidden away in manuscripts and rare editions. For centuries she was remembered only faintly, a whisper of brilliance in the convent halls. In more recent times, Sor Juana has been rediscovered as one of the greatest voices of Latin American literature. Her poetry reveals both sensitivity and strength. Her plays explore themes of power, gender, and knowledge with depth and humor. Her letters stand as early declarations of women's intellectual rights. Today, she is honored in Mexico as a symbol of learning and courage. Her face even appears on currency, a quiet recognition of the power she once held in words. The life of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is a story of both triumph and loss. Triumph because she showed the world what a brilliant woman could achieve even in the most limiting circumstances. Loss because her voice was silenced before its full power could be heard. She reminds us that genius often struggles not only against ignorance, but against systems built to contain it. As we think of her now, we can picture a woman in a simple cell, surrounded by books, writing by candlelight while the city slept outside. Her words flowed with wit, wisdom, and quiet defiance. She was a forgotten genius whose love of knowledge challenged her world and still inspires ours. In the early 19th century, when factories echoed with the sound of steam engines and mathematics was still written by hand on long sheets of paper, a young woman in England imagined a future no one else could yet see. Her name was Augusta Ada King, better known as Ada Lovelace. She was the daughter of the poet Lord Byron and his wife Annabella Milbanke. From her father, she inherited imagination, and from her mother, she inherited a strict education in mathematics. The union of these two influences created a mind unlike any other of her time. As a child, Ada showed a fascination with machines. She studied geometry and algebra with tutors who were surprised by her persistence. While other young women of her class were encouraged toward music or social refinement, Ada poured her energy into the language of numbers. She drew diagrams of imaginary flying machines and worked through difficult problems with tireless energy. Her mother, determined that Ada would not inherit her father's poetic instability, guided her toward logic and science. When Ada was a young woman, she met Charles Babbage, a mathematician and inventor who was designing a calculating machine called the analytical engine. This machine, though never fully built, was far ahead of its time. It was intended to perform mathematical operations automatically, using punched cards to control its functions. Most saw it as a complex calculator, but Ada saw something far greater. She translated a paper on Babbage's machine from French into English, and in doing so, added her own extensive notes. These notes were longer than the original article and contained insights that revealed her true genius. In them, she described how the machine could do more than arithmetic. She wrote that it could manipulate symbols and follow instructions in a sequence. In other words, it could be programmed. She even outlined a method for the machine to calculate a sequence of numbers known as Bernoulli numbers. This is now recognized as the first computer program. Ada's vision went beyond mathematics. She imagined that such a machine could one day compose music, create graphics, or perform tasks not yet dreamed of. To her, the analytical engine was not a mechanical calculator, but a universal machine capable of expressing any process that could be broken into steps. This insight placed her a century ahead of her time, pointing toward the digital world we live in today. Yet, in her own era, Ada's work was not widely recognized. The analytical engine remained unfinished, and her notes were read by only a few. She lived a short life, passing away from illness at the age of 36. Her brilliance was overshadowed by her famous father, and her contribution nearly forgotten. Only in the 20th century, when computers began to take form, did scholars look back and see the importance of her vision. Today, Ada Lovelace is remembered as a pioneer of computing, often called the first programmer. But beyond titles, she stands as a symbol of imagination joined with logic. She combined poetic vision with mathematical precision, showing that creativity and calculation are not opposites, but partners. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come not from building machines, but from seeing what they could become. As we reflect on her life, we can picture a woman seated at her desk in Victorian England, pen in hand, surrounded by papers filled with numbers and notes. Outside, the world moved with carriages and factories, but inside her mind ran a vision of engines that could think in patterns beyond the reach of human hands. Ada Lovelace was a forgotten genius, her voice quiet in her own time, but clear in ours, calling across centuries to remind us that imagination is as vital to progress as reason. In the quiet gardens of a monastery in 19th century, Moravia lived a man whose patient work with plants changed the future of biology. His name was Gregor Mendel. He was born in the year 1822 in a farming family, and from an early age he showed curiosity about the natural world. Life was not easy for him, and his family had little wealth, but his intelligence was noticed by local teachers. With their support, he entered the Augustinian monastery in the city of Brno, where he found both a home and the freedom to study. Mendel was a monk But he was also a scientist at heart. Surrounded by the order and peace of the monastery, he turned his attention to the plants in its gardens. While others saw simple peas, Mendel saw patterns waiting to be uncovered. He began carefully breeding different varieties, tracking the traits of their flowers, seeds, and pods. He noted colors, shapes, and textures with meticulous care, recording each result in long tables of observation. Over many years, Mendel planted thousands of pea plants. He noticed that certain traits did not blend in the offspring, as many had believed, but followed predictable ratios. A smooth seed, crossed with a wrinkled one, produced offspring that was smooth. But when these offspring were bred again, the wrinkled trait reappeared in a consistent pattern. Mendel realized that invisible factors, which he called elements, must govern these traits. Today, we know them as genes. From his experiments, he developed 3 principles that still form the foundation of genetics: the principle of dominance, the principle of segregation, and the principle of independent assortment. These simple laws explained how traits are passed from parents to offspring, not by blending, but by discrete units that remain intact across generations. In essence, Mendel had uncovered the language of heredity, yet during his lifetime his work went almost unnoticed. He published his findings in 1866 in a small scientific journal, but few paid attention. The world of biology at that time was focused on Darwin's theory of evolution, and Mendel's peas seemed a small curiosity compared to the grand story of natural selection. The scientific community lacked the framework to see the importance of his work. For decades, his papers lay forgotten, read by only a handful of people. Mendel himself did not live to see recognition. He became abbot of his monastery, devoting much of his later years to administration rather than science. He died in 1884, remembered locally as a kind and diligent monk, but not celebrated as a scientist. His garden fell silent, and his experiments seemed destined to vanish into obscurity. Only at the turn of the 20th century did 3 independent researchers, Hugo de Vries, Carl Correns, and Erich von Chermach, rediscover Mendel's laws. Suddenly, the patterns he had observed in peas made sense within the new science of heredity. Mendel was declared the father of genetics, his once ignored experiments recognized as a cornerstone of modern biology. Today, every student who learns about genes, chromosomes, and inheritance is following in Mendel's footsteps. His careful rows of peas became the foundation for our understanding of how life passes from one generation to the next. What was once the quiet work of a monk in a monastery garden has become the basis of medicine, agriculture, and countless scientific discoveries. As we reflect on Mendel's life, we can picture him in his garden, notebook in hand, kneeling among the vines. Around him the monastery bells tolled, marking the rhythm of prayer, but his own rhythm was the slow unfolding of generations of plants. He did not seek fame or fortune. only truth in the patterns of nature. Gregor Mendel was a forgotten genius whose patient care revealed secrets that would change the world long after he was gone. In the middle of the 19th century, hospitals across Europe were places of both healing and fear. Science was advancing, yet death from infection was common. In crowded maternity wards, young mothers often died soon after giving birth. Doctors could not explain why. Some believed in imbalances of bodily fluids. Others spoke of mysterious influences in the air. Into this world came a Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis, whose simple idea could have saved thousands of lives, yet whose warning was ignored. Semmelweis was born in 1818 in Buda, a city that later became part of Budapest. He studied medicine in Vienna and chose obstetrics as his specialty. At the General Hospital of Vienna, he observed 2 maternity clinics. One was staffed by doctors and medical students, the other by midwives. Strangely, the death rate in the doctor's clinic was far higher than in the midwife's clinic. The difference was shocking and demanded explanation. Semmelweis began to investigate. He examined the practices of each clinic, searching for a pattern. Then tragedy struck. A colleague of his was cut by a scalpel while performing an autopsy and soon died with symptoms strikingly similar to the mothers in the ward. Suddenly, Semmelweis saw the connection. Doctors and students often went directly from the autopsy room to the delivery room without washing their hands. They were carrying deadly material from corpses to living patients. His conclusion was simple. Washing hands in a solution of chlorinated lime before examining mothers could prevent the disease. He ordered this practice in his clinic, and the results were immediate. The death rate dropped dramatically, from 1 in 10 to less than 1 in 100. For the first time, a clear and effective method to prevent infection had been found. Yet instead of recognition, Semmelweis faced resistance. Many doctors felt insulted by the suggestion that their own hands were causing death. At the time, the idea of invisible germs was not yet accepted. The medical establishment clung to old theories and rejected Semmelweis as misguided. His strict enforcement of hand-washing earned him enemies, and his temperament, often fiery and impatient, did not help his cause. In 1850, he left Vienna and returned to Hungary, where he continued to promote hand hygiene. His results were the same. Fewer mothers died when hand-washing was practiced. Still, the wider medical world ignored him. He published a book on his findings, but critics dismissed it as unproven. The frustration weighed heavily on him. He knew he had discovered a simple truth that could save lives. Yet, he could not persuade others to listen. Tragically, Semmelweis' life ended in sadness. His mental health declined under the pressure of rejection and ridicule. In 1865, he was placed in an asylum where he died shortly after, at only 47 years old. Ironically, his death came from an infection after a wound, the very danger he had fought against. Decades later, when Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister proved the germ theory of disease, Semmelweis's observations were finally understood. He became known as the savior of mothers, a pioneer of antiseptic practice. His name, once ridiculed, became honored in the history of medicine. Today, every hospital, every clinic, and every operating room practices what Semmelweis tried so hard to teach. Wash your hands. It is so ordinary now that we forget it was once revolutionary. His story reminds us that truth can be resisted not because it is weak, but because it demands change from those who hold power. As we reflect on his life, we picture a weary doctor, sleeves rolled up, insisting that his colleagues take a few moments to cleanse their hands, while mothers and infants waited in fragile hope. Ignaz Semmelweis was a forgotten genius, a man whose simple insight was dismissed in his time, but later recognized as one of the most important steps in modern medicine. In the 20th century, as science pushed deeper into the secrets of life, one woman played a crucial role in revealing the structure of the molecule that defines every living being. Her name was Rosalind Franklin. She was born in London in the year 1920. From a young age, she showed an unusual clarity of thought and a determination to study. At a time when women in science faced constant barriers, she pressed forward with quiet strength. Franklin studied chemistry at Cambridge University, excelling in both theory and experiment. After her degree, she worked in laboratories in England and France, mastering the new technique of X-ray crystallography. This method used beams of X-rays to create patterns on photographic film, patterns that revealed the arrangement of atoms within a substance. It was delicate, painstaking work, demanding precision and patience. Franklin proved to be a master of it. When she returned to London in the early 1950s, she began applying X-ray crystallography to the study of DNA, the molecule of heredity. At that time, the structure of DNA was unknown. Some imagined it as a simple chain, others as a tangle of repeating units. Franklin, with her careful experiments, provided the clarity the world was waiting for. Her most famous contribution was a photograph known as Photo 51. It showed a striking X-shaped pattern, the signature of a helical structure. This single image provided critical evidence that DNA formed a double helix. The photograph was shared without her direct permission with James Watson and Francis Crick, who, together with Maurice Wilkins, used it to build their famous model of DNA. In 1953, they published their discovery, which soon became one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs of the century. Franklin's role was not fully recognized. Her data had been essential, yet the Nobel Prize for the discovery went only to Watson, Crick, and Wilkins. By then, Franklin had already moved on to study viruses, producing important work on the tobacco mosaic virus and the polio virus. She continued her research with the same dedication, but her life was cut short. In 1958, she died of cancer at the age of only 37. For many years, her contribution remained overshadowed. Some accounts minimized her role, while others overlooked her entirely. Only later did historians and scientists begin to restore her place in the story. They recognized that without her precise experiments, the double helix might not have been revealed when it was. Franklin had given science the key image, the clear evidence, yet she had not lived to see the recognition she deserved. Her legacy today is powerful. She is remembered as a symbol of perseverance in the face of obstacles, and as a reminder of how women in science have often been denied their due. Her work continues to inspire new generations of researchers who see in her life both the challenge and the promise of discovery. As we think of Rosalind Franklin, we picture a quiet laboratory, the hum of machines, the careful adjustment of instruments, and the glow of an X-ray beam striking its mark. We see a woman focused not on fame but on truth, capturing on film the hidden spiral of life itself. She was a forgotten genius, her brilliance muted by circumstance, yet her vision engraved forever in the structure of DNA. In the early 17th century, at a time when few women were allowed to pursue art as a profession, there lived a painter whose courage and talent broke through the barriers of her world. Her name was Artemisia Gentileschi. She was born in Rome in the year 1593, the daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, a respected artist. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by brushes, pigments, and canvases. While other girls were taught to sew or manage a household, Artemisia learned the language of light and color. She studied in her father's workshop, watching him paint and slowly picking up the skills herself. Her progress was astonishing. By the age of 17, she had completed her first signed painting, Susanna and the Elders. The canvas showed not a graceful myth, but a young woman tormented by unwanted advances, rendered with a realism and emotion rarely seen in such subjects. Already Artemisia's voice as an artist was clear. She painted with honesty, giving power to women in stories, often told through the eyes of men. Her career, however, was not free of struggle. When she was a teenager, she was assaulted by a painter who had been brought in to tutor her. The trial that followed became a public scandal. Artemisia was subjected to humiliating questioning, even physical torture, to test her testimony. Yet she persisted, defending her truth with courage. Out of this ordeal came not defeat, but strength. In her paintings, she returned again and again to themes of women's resilience, struggle, and triumph. One of her most famous works is Judith slaying Holofernes. In it, Judith, with sleeves rolled up, drives her sword into the tyrant, while her maid holds him down. The painting is filled with force, painted with the same dramatic light that Caravaggio had mastered, yet with a perspective uniquely her own. Here, the women are not passive figures, but powerful agents of action. Viewers of the time were shocked by the intensity, but also unable to deny the skill. Artemisia's talent carried her far beyond Rome. She worked in Florence, Naples, and even London. She became the first woman admitted to the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno in Florence, a rare honor. She painted portraits, religious scenes, and allegories, always with a strength of expression that set her apart. Patrons included members of the nobility and even kings. Despite the challenges of her gender, she built a career that few women of her time could dream of. Yet, over the centuries, her name faded. Art history was often written by men who celebrated her male contemporaries while neglecting her. Many of her works were attributed to others, her signature overlooked. For generations, she was remembered more for the scandal of her trial than for the brilliance of her art. It was only in the late 20th century that Artemisia was rediscovered. Scholars began to recognize her mastery, and exhibitions brought her paintings back into the light. Today, she is celebrated as one of the great Baroque painters, a woman who not only equaled her male peers, but often surpassed them. Her story has become a symbol of resilience, showing how genius can survive even in the harshest circumstances. As we reflect on Artemisia Gentileschi, we see a figure who painted with both skill and soul. She transformed personal suffering into images of strength. She gave voice to women in a world that tried to silence them. She was a forgotten genius whose brush carried both beauty and defiance, and whose work continues to inspire across the centuries. In the early 17th century, at a time when few women were allowed to pursue art as a profession, there lived a painter whose courage and talent broke through the barriers of her world. Her name was Artemisia Gentileschi. She was born in Rome in the year 1593, the daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, a respected artist. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by brushes, pigments, and canvases. While other girls were taught to sew or manage a household, Artemisia learned the language of light and color. She studied in her father's workshop, watching him paint and slowly picking up the skills herself. Her progress was astonishing. By the age of 17, she had completed her first signed painting, Susanna and the Elders. The canvas showed not a graceful myth, but a young woman tormented by unwanted advances, rendered with a realism and emotion rarely seen in such subjects. Already Artemisia's voice as an artist was clear. She painted with honesty, giving power to women in stories often told through the eyes of men. Her career, however, was not free of struggle. When she was a teenager, she was assaulted by a painter who had been brought in to tutor her. The trial that followed became a public scandal. Artemisia was subjected to humiliating questioning, even physical torture, to test her testimony. Yet she persisted, defending her truth with courage. Out of this ordeal came not defeat, but strength. In her paintings, she returned again and again to themes of women's resilience, struggle, and triumph. One of her most famous works is Judith slaying Holofernes. In it, Judith, with sleeves rolled up, drives her sword into the tyrant while her maid holds him down. The painting is filled with force, painted with the same dramatic light that Caravaggio had mastered, yet with a perspective uniquely her own. Here, the women are not passive figures, but powerful agents of action. Viewers of the time were shocked by the intensity, but also unable to deny the skill. Artemisia's talent carried her far beyond Rome. She worked in Florence, Naples, and even London. She became the first woman admitted to the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno in Florence, a rare honor. She painted portraits, religious scenes, and allegories, always with a strength of expression that set her apart. Patrons included members of the nobility and even kings. Despite the challenges of her gender, she built a career that few women of her time could dream of. Yet, over the centuries, her name faded. Art history was often written by men who celebrated her male contemporaries while neglecting her. Many of her works were attributed to others, her signature overlooked. For generations, she was remembered more for the scandal of her trial than for the brilliance of her art. It was only in the late 20th century that Artemisia was rediscovered. Scholars began to recognize her mastery, and exhibitions brought her paintings back into the light. Today, she is celebrated as one of the great Baroque painters, a woman who not only equaled her male peers, but often surpassed them. Her story has become a symbol of resilience, showing how genius can survive even in the harshest circumstances. As we reflect on Artemisia Gentileschi, we see a figure who painted with both skill and soul. She transformed personal suffering into images of strength. She gave voice to women in a world that tried to silence them. She was a forgotten genius whose brush carried both beauty and defiance, and whose work continues to inspire across the centuries. In the early 18th century, the city of Venice was alive with music. Canals echoed with song, churches filled with choirs, and opera houses welcomed travelers from across Europe. In this vibrant world lived a composer whose melodies captured both the joy and the storms of life. His name was Antonio Vivaldi. Today he is remembered for the Four Seasons, but in his lifetime he created hundreds of concertos, operas, and sacred works. His talent was extraordinary, yet after his death, his name faded into obscurity for nearly 2 centuries. Vivaldi was born in 1678, the son of a violinist. From childhood, he was trained in music, showing great skill with the violin. At the same time, he studied for the priesthood and was ordained in his mid-20s. Because of his bright red hair, he was often called the Red Priest. Yet his true devotion was not the pulpit, but music. He became a teacher at an orphanage for girls in Venice, known as the Ospedale della Pietà. There he trained young musicians and composed works for them to perform. The performances at the orphanage became famous, drawing visitors from across Europe. Behind the walls of a modest institution, Vivaldi created a world of sound that astonished audiences. His concertos displayed lively rhythms, vivid imagery, and a freshness that set them apart from the more formal style of his contemporaries. In the Four Seasons, for example, he painted with notes the singing of birds, the rush of storms, the heat of summer, and the chill of winter. It was music that carried nature itself into the concert hall. For a time, Vivaldi was celebrated. He traveled, received commissions from nobility, and wrote operas that entertained crowded theaters. Yet fashions in music change quickly. By the end of his life, his style was considered old. Younger composers such as Bach and Handel drew more admiration, and Vivaldi struggled to find support. He died in Vienna in 1741, poor and largely forgotten. His burial was simple, with little honor for a man who had once filled Venice with sound. After his death, his music slipped into silence. Many of his manuscripts lay hidden in archives, unperformed and unstudied. For nearly 200 years, he was a name known only to a few specialists. The world of music moved on, forgetting the man who had written so many masterpieces. It was only in the 20th century that his work was rediscovered. Scholars found collections of his concertos, and musicians began to perform them again. The energy, color, and emotion of his compositions startled modern audiences. Recordings of the Four Seasons spread across the world, and suddenly Vivaldi's name was alive once more. What had been forgotten became beloved as listeners recognized the timeless vitality of his art. Today, Vivaldi is honored as one of the great masters of the Baroque. His concertos are performed everywhere, from grand concert halls to small village squares. His music accompanies films, plays on radio, and fills playlists. The sound of his violin lines, both delicate and fiery, speaks as directly to modern ears as it did to the citizens of Venice 3 centuries ago. Yet the story of his life reminds us how fragile fame can be. A genius may be celebrated in one age and ignored in the next, only to be discovered again when the time is right. Vivaldi's melodies waited in silence, patient as the turning of the seasons themselves. As we reflect on Antonio Vivaldi, we can imagine him standing before a group of young musicians in Venice, violin in hand, guiding them through a piece filled with life and energy. The room glows with sound, the notes rising like sunlight through open windows. He was a forgotten genius, whose music lay hidden for centuries, but whose voice sings again, gentle and eternal, across the world. In the early 18th century, the city of Venice was alive with music. Canals echoed with song, churches filled with choirs, and opera houses welcomed travelers from across Europe. In this vibrant world lived a composer whose melodies captured both the joy and the storms of life. His name was Antonio Vivaldi. Today he is remembered for the Four Seasons, but in his lifetime he created hundreds of concertos, operas, and sacred works. His talent was extraordinary, yet after his death, his name faded into obscurity for nearly 2 centuries. Vivaldi was born in 1678, the son of a violinist. From childhood, he was trained in music, showing great skill with the violin. At the same time, he studied for the priesthood and was ordained in his mid-20s. Because of his bright red hair, he was often called the Red Priest. Yet his true devotion was not the pulpit, but music. He became a teacher at an orphanage for girls in Venice, known as the Ospedale della Pietà. There he trained young musicians and composed works for them to perform. The performances at the orphanage became famous, drawing visitors from across Europe. Behind the walls of a modest institution, Vivaldi created a world of sound that astonished audiences. His concertos displayed lively rhythms, vivid imagery, and a freshness that set them apart from the more formal style of his contemporaries. In the Four Seasons, for example, he painted with notes the singing of birds, the rush of storms, the heat of summer, and the chill of winter. It was music that carried nature itself into the concert hall. For a time, Vivaldi was celebrated. He traveled, received commissions from nobility, and wrote operas that entertained crowded theaters. Yet fashions in music change quickly. By the end of his life, his style was considered old. Younger composers such as Bach and Handel drew more admiration, and Vivaldi struggled to find support. He died in Vienna in 1741, poor and largely forgotten. His burial was simple, with little honor for a man who had once filled Venice with sound. After his death, his music slipped into silence. Many of his manuscripts lay hidden in archives, unperformed and unstudied. For nearly 200 years, he was a name known only to a few specialists. The world of music moved on, forgetting the man who had written so many masterpieces. It was only in the 20th century that his work was rediscovered. Scholars found collections of his concertos, and musicians began to perform them again. The energy, color, and emotion of his compositions startled modern audiences. Recordings of the Four Seasons spread across the world, and suddenly Vivaldi's name was alive once more. What had been forgotten became beloved as listeners recognized the timeless vitality of his art. Today, Vivaldi is honored as one of the great masters of the Baroque. His concertos are performed everywhere, from grand concert halls to small village squares. His music accompanies films, plays on radio, and fills playlists. The sound of his violin lines, both delicate and fiery, speaks as directly to modern ears as it did to the citizens of Venice 3 centuries ago. Yet the story of his life reminds us how fragile fame can be. A genius may be celebrated in one age and ignored in the next, only to be discovered again when the time is right. Vivaldi's melodies waited in silence, patient as the turning of the seasons themselves. As we reflect on Antonio Vivaldi, we can imagine him standing before a group of young musicians in Venice, violin in hand, guiding them through a piece filled with life, and energy. The room glows with sound, the notes rising like sunlight through open windows. He was a forgotten genius, whose music lay hidden for centuries, but whose voice sings again, gentle and eternal, across the world. Throughout history, ideas have often traveled further than their creators could have dreamed. The men and women we have remembered in this journey lived in very different times, but their thoughts did not vanish with them. Knowledge, once born, has a way of reaching across centuries, even if it lies hidden for a long while. The reach of forgotten knowledge can be quiet, almost invisible, yet its effect is immense. When Heron of Alexandria built his spinning sphere powered by steam, few could imagine that one day such principles would drive vast engines across continents. His Aeolipile sat in temples as a marvel, a toy of science, yet in its motion was the seed of the Industrial Revolution. 17 centuries later, inventors would take the same idea and build machines that powered factories, trains, and ships. Heron's name was nearly forgotten, but his thought reached forward, shaping the modern world. Al-Jazari's intricate clocks and mechanical devices delighted the courts of the Middle East in the 12th century. To his patrons, they were wonders of art and entertainment. Yet within their gears and cranks lay the foundations of modern mechanics. Centuries later, when engineers sought to build engines and machines, they unknowingly followed paths that Al-Jazari had already walked. His imagination stretched across ages, his knowledge lingering in drawings and manuscripts until the world was ready to listen. The same was true for thinkers like Avicenna. His canon of medicine guided physicians for centuries, not only in the Islamic world, but also in Europe, long after his name had faded from common memory. Even when new discoveries replaced parts of his work, the structure of his approach, careful observation, logical reasoning, and systematic study remained as a model for science. In this way, his influence reached through time, shaping practices that still define medicine today. Other figures, like Gregor Mendel, were ignored in their own lifetimes, but later became cornerstones of entire sciences. His quiet garden experiments with peas seemed unimportant to his contemporaries, but decades later, they became the language of genetics. Knowledge may be set aside, but once it is written, it waits for the right eyes to find it. Mendel's patient notes reached far beyond the monastery walls, guiding discoveries he never lived to see. This reach of forgotten knowledge is not always smooth. Often ideas are carried in fragments, misunderstood or dismissed until a new generation rediscovers them. Caravaggio's paintings were once considered crude and too direct, yet centuries later, they became the inspiration for modern realism and cinematic light. Vivaldi's music was buried in archives, only to re-emerge and fill concert halls worldwide. In each case, the work did not die with its creator. It traveled silently, like seeds waiting in the soil, ready to sprout when conditions changed. The lesson in all these stories is that knowledge is rarely lost completely. Scrolls may burn, manuscripts may be hidden, and voices may fall silent, but ideas often find a way to endure. They travel through memory, through copies, through echoes in the work of others. They cross borders and centuries, carried by chance or by those who recognize their worth. As we reflect on this pattern, it is humbling to think how much of what we know today rests on forgotten foundations. Every machine, every theory, every piece of music carries traces of those who came before. The reach of forgotten knowledge reminds us that progress is not a straight line, but a weaving of memory and rediscovery. In the stillness of history, genius may sleep for a time, but it does not disappear. It waits, patient and enduring, until the world is ready once more. And when it awakens, it reshapes the present, a quiet gift from minds long past. When we look across the stories of forgotten geniuses, a clear pattern begins to appear. It is not simply chance that so many brilliant minds were ignored, dismissed, or remembered only centuries later. There is a rhythm to neglect, shaped by society, culture, and human nature itself. To understand this pattern is to understand why so much genius goes unrecognized in its own time. The first part of the pattern is resistance to change. New ideas often challenge what people believe, and belief is rarely surrendered easily. When Giordano Bruno spoke of an infinite universe filled with countless suns, he did not just describe the heavens, he unsettled the foundations of religion and authority. When Ignaz Semmelweis insisted that doctors must wash their hands, he was not only suggesting a practice, he was challenging the pride of a profession. Ideas that demand change from those in power are often met with denial, no matter how true they are. The second part of the pattern is context. Heron of Alexandria invented a steam engine in the 1st century, but his society had no need for machines to replace human or animal labor. The economy was built on slaves and manual work, so his device remained a curiosity. Similarly, Al-Jazari's mechanical marvels entertained nobles, but did not transform industry, because the age lacked the pressures that later drove technological revolutions. A genius can see the future, but if the world is not ready, their vision remains only a shadow of what it might become. Another part of the pattern is prejudice. Many of the figures we have remembered faced barriers not of intellect, but of identity. Ada Lovelace was dismissed in her time because she was a woman in a world that rarely credited women with mathematical insight. Rosalind Franklin produced the decisive photograph of DNA, yet her contribution was overshadowed by men who took credit for the discovery. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz was silenced, not because of lack of talent, but because she dared to learn in an age when women were expected to remain quiet. In each case, genius was neglected not because it was small, but because it appeared in a body society did not value. Neglect also arises from the short memory of fame. Caravaggio was celebrated in his lifetime, But after his violent death, his reputation sank, his paintings forgotten in dusty chapels. Antonio Vivaldi filled Venice with music, but within a generation, his name was lost, his works left in archives. Fashion moves quickly, and when tastes change, even brilliance can vanish from view until rediscovery. Finally, there is the pattern of humility and obscurity. Some geniuses, like Gregor Mendel, did not seek fame. He worked quietly in a monastery garden, writing observations that seemed unimportant to his peers. Only later did the world realize that his tables of peas contained the laws of heredity. In such cases, neglect is not hostility, but indifference. The world simply does not notice until time has passed. This repeating pattern, resistance to change, lack of context, prejudice, fading of fashion, and the quietness of humble work explains why so many minds were forgotten. It shows us that neglect is not random. It is built into the way societies guard their beliefs, their structures, and their comforts. Genius, by its nature, looks beyond what is comfortable. That is why it is so often left unrecognized until the future arrives. As we reflect on this pattern, it becomes clear that forgetting is not the end of a story. Neglect is often only a pause, a silence that lasts until another generation is ready to listen. What is ignored in one age can become central in another. The pattern of neglect, then, is also the pattern of rediscovery. It reminds us that truth, though delayed, has a way of finding its voice again. To live ahead of one's time is both a gift and a burden. The forgotten geniuses we have remembered show us that vision often carries a heavy cost. They saw truths before others, and because of that they faced rejection, loneliness, and even danger. To be ahead is to walk on ground that others do not yet recognize, and such ground can feel cold and empty. For Hypatia of Alexandria, the cost was her very life. She spoke of philosophy and reason in a city torn by conflict. Her presence threatened the balance of power, and she was killed not because she was wrong, but because she was too far ahead of the acceptance her world could give. For Giordano Bruno, the cost was fire in a Roman square. He dreamed of infinite stars when others clung to a closed universe, and the courage to hold his vision brought him death. For others, the cost was not death, but neglect. Gregor Mendel worked patiently, year after year, charting the hidden laws of inheritance. His discoveries could have advanced biology by decades, but instead, they were ignored, and he died unrecognized. Ignaz Semmelweis saved mothers by insisting on hand-washing, yet his warning was mocked, and his life ended in despair. To know the truth and to see it dismissed is its own kind of suffering. Even when the cost was not tragedy, it was often silence. Ada Lovelace wrote of machines that could follow instructions and even create, but her words were read by almost no one in her own age. Rosalind Franklin captured the hidden spiral of DNA, Yet her contribution was overlooked, and others took the prize. Their names were quiet when they should have been celebrated. The cost of being ahead also appears in exile and isolation. Caravaggio lived hunted, his genius alive in paintings, while his body fled from city to city. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz was silenced, forced to give up her books and her pen. Hildegard of Bingen spoke through visions that were dismissed for centuries. Each bore the weight of a mind that reached further than society could follow. And yet, there is another side to this cost. To live ahead of one's time is also to plant seeds. The genius who suffers neglect does not create in vain. Their ideas, their music, their discoveries rest quietly until another age finds them. Heron's steam engine spun for no purpose in a temple, yet centuries later, the same principle drove trains across continents. Vivaldi's notes slept in archives, only to awaken in modern concert halls. Mendel's peas grew in silence, then blossomed into the field of genetics. The burden of being ahead is heavy, but it is not meaningless. It shows us that progress is not always immediate. Sometimes it demands patience measured not in years, but in centuries. Genius may not receive reward in its own lifetime, but it leaves traces that endure, waiting for recognition. As we reflect on this cost, we see that every advance carries a price. The thinkers who push beyond the horizon often do so alone, misunderstood or rejected. Yet their solitude is also their gift to us. They reach forward where we cannot, and though they may fall, their vision remains. The world is richer because they dared to walk ahead. The cost of being ahead, then, is not only personal suffering, but the strange fate of leaving one's reward to the future. It is a quiet sacrifice where glory is exchanged for truth and comfort for vision. And though history may forget for a time, it always remembers again. As we come to the end of this quiet journey through forgotten genius, it is worth pausing to reflect. The names we have spoken belong to different centuries, different lands, and different callings. Some were inventors of machines, others dreamers of infinity, healers of the sick, or artists who painted and composed in silence. Yet across all their lives runs a common thread. Each of them looked further than their own time allowed. Each of them gave more than the world was ready to receive. To think of Heron is to picture a small sphere spinning gently on a breath of steam, a toy in the eyes of his age, but a prophecy of the power that would one day drive entire nations. To think of Hypatia is to imagine a teacher surrounded by students, her calm voice describing the harmony of the stars, while outside the city swirled with turmoil. To think of Mendel is to see a monk in a garden, tending rows of peas, unaware that his quiet notes would become the language of heredity. To think of Vivaldi is to hear violins singing of storms and sunlight, his music left in silence for centuries, until the world was ready to listen again. These images remind us that genius is rarely obvious in its own moment. It is fragile, easily overlooked, sometimes even punished, yet it endures. The ideas of the forgotten do not vanish. They wait, like seeds buried in deep soil, until another season arrives. Some truths need time to grow. Some voices need centuries to be heard. There is comfort in this thought. It means that what is neglected today may one day be cherished. It means that the effort of one mind, even if ignored, can still shape the future. It also means that our own age, with all its noise and haste, may be overlooking visionaries whose worth will only be seen long after we are gone. History is patient. It carries forward what is needed, even if it forgets for a while. As you rest with these stories, let them drift like gentle echoes. Think of the light falling across Caravaggio's canvas, the notes of Hildegard rising in stone halls, the measured experiments of Franklin, the courage of Bruno, the quiet defiance of Sor Juana. Each life was different, but each left behind a gift. Together they show us that the human spirit reaches beyond the limits of its moment, always searching, always creating. The forgotten geniuses remind us that greatness is not always in fame or recognition. Sometimes it is in persistence, in vision, in the refusal to let go of truth. They remind us that progress is built not only by those celebrated in their own time, but by those who labored in silence, planting seeds for futures they would never see. As the night deepens, let these reflections settle like a calm tide. History is not a straight path, but a long weaving of memory, silence, and rediscovery. To listen to it is to hear not only what was spoken loudly, but also what was whispered and nearly lost. In those whispers, we often find the deepest truths. So let us end quietly, with gratitude for the hidden minds who changed the world. Their names may have been forgotten, but their gifts remain, shaping our lives in ways we often do not see. May their stories bring you peace, and may the calm rhythm of history guide you gently into rest. As the journey of tonight's story comes to its end, let us take one final moment of reflection. We have walked through centuries, listening to voices that spoke softly, often unheard in their own time. Their inventions, their writings, their music, and their visions carried truths that were too large for the world around them, and so they were overlooked, silenced, or pushed aside. Yet in their quiet persistence they left behind seeds that grew long after they were gone. It is humbling to remember that the world we live in is built not only on the triumphs of famous names, but also on the forgotten labor of hidden minds. The engines that power our cities, the medicines that heal, the melodies that soothe, and the questions that still guide our search for meaning, all of these are touched by the lives of those who did not live to see their own impact. Their work flowed forward through time, carried like a hidden current, until it reached us. In this calm awareness, we find both gratitude and perspective. Gratitude because our lives are enriched by the courage and brilliance of people we may never fully know. Perspective, because it reminds us that progress is not always instant and recognition is not always immediate. Genius is not measured by applause. It is measured by the quiet endurance of truth, even when no one listens. As you let these thoughts drift, imagine the long arc of history as a river moving slowly to the sea. Along its banks stand countless figures, some known, many forgotten. Each drops a stone into the current, a thought, a discovery, a work of art. The stones sink, disappear from view, yet the river carries their ripples forward. You and I live within those ripples, often unaware of the hands that set them in motion. The forgotten geniuses we have recalled tonight remind us that silence is not the end of a story. What seems hidden may one day be revealed. What seems neglected may one day be honored. And what seems small may one day prove to have changed the world. So let this conclusion be simple. Rest with the knowledge that human creativity, though fragile, is enduring. Rest with the thought that even in times of neglect, the light of imagination is never fully extinguished. It waits, it lingers, and it returns. Thank you for spending this time with me. My name is Nathan, and it has been an honor to guide you through these stories. If you found comfort in this calm journey through history, I invite you to support the channel by subscribing. Your presence helps us continue creating gentle explorations of the past for those who seek rest, focus, or a quiet companion in the night. Now, as the echoes of these forgotten voices fade, may peace settle over you. May the rhythm of history become the rhythm of your own breathing, steady and calm, and may sleep, when it comes, be as gentle as the quiet truths carried through time.